Can one person influence the fate of an entire country? During the 19th century, the United States faced a crisis that threatened to tear the country apart for good. Slavery had created deep divisions in a nation founded on the idea of freedom. Tensions were rising, states began to break away, and the country stood on the edge of a terrible conflict. In the middle of that storm, an unexpected figure emerged. Abraham Lincoln, despite growing up in poverty and suffering repeated defeats, rose as a national leader and guided the country through its darkest hours. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the Story Hour. After that, leave a comment and tell us which other historical leaders you would like to discover. Alright. To understand Abraham Lincoln, you first have to understand the world he was born into. In the early 19th century, the United States of America was far from united. It was a country already at war with itself long before any cannons were fired. The North was industrializing, factories were expanding, cities were growing. A new economy was taking shape around machines and wages. But the South depended on something else entirely. 4 million human beings, enslaved, bought, sold, treated not as people, but as property. And the question that haunted every generation of American leaders, the question no one wanted to answer, was this: can a nation built on the promise of freedom survive while holding millions in chains? For decades, politicians avoided it. They compromised. They delayed. They looked away. But history was building toward a moment when looking away would no longer be possible. Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809, in Hardin County, Kentucky. His family had almost nothing. His mother died when he was 9 years old. His father moved the family from state to state, clearing land and chasing survival. Lincoln had no privilege, no powerful connections, no prestigious university. His total formal education, less than a year. But Lincoln had something no school could teach. He had a mind that devoured every book it could find. He had a voice that could hold an entire courtroom in silence. And he had a moral compass that, slowly, quietly, was pointing him toward the greatest crisis in American history. He became a lawyer, then a state legislator, then a congressman, briefly. And for a time, it seemed like Abraham Lincoln's political career was over. He was a man the country had forgotten. But history was not done with him. By the 1850s, America was coming apart. The issue of slavery could no longer be avoided. New territories were opening in the West, and one question now dominated the nation: would these new lands be free or slave? Violence exploded in Kansas. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers killed each other in open fields. Congress became a battleground of words, and sometimes even fists. Then, in 1857, the Supreme Court delivered a ruling that shocked the nation's conscience. In the Dred Scott case, the court declared that black Americans, whether free or enslaved, were not citizens, had no rights, were, in the eyes of the law, nothing. The South celebrated. The North was horrified. And in this cauldron of fury and division, a tall, gaunt lawyer from Illinois stepped forward and spoke 7 words that would define his destiny. A house divided against itself cannot stand. In 1860, something happened that would change America, and the world, forever. Abraham Lincoln was elected the 16th President of the United States. He won without carrying a single Southern state. And before he even took the oath of office, the nation began to break apart. South Carolina seceded, then Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas. One by one, like dominoes falling into darkness, they formed the Confederate States of America. They chose their own president. They built their own army. And on April 12, 1861, Confederate cannons opened fire on Fort Sumter. The Civil War had begun. Over the next 4 years, more than 600,000 Americans would die, more than in every other American war combined. Brother fought brother. Fathers buried sons. Fields turned into graveyards. And through it all, one man carried the unbearable weight of holding the Union together. Lincoln barely slept. He seemed to age decades in months. He buried his own son during the war. He faced generals who failed him, politicians who betrayed him, and a public that often cursed his name. But he did not break. And on January 1, 1863, he signed a document that changed the course of the war, and America. The Emancipation Proclamation declared that all enslaved people in Confederate states were, from that moment forward, free. It was not the end of slavery. Not yet. but it was the beginning of the end, and Lincoln knew it. By 1865, the Confederacy had collapsed. Lincoln had done what no one thought possible. He had preserved the Union. He had redefined what America meant. And in January of that year, he pushed through the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, abolishing slavery permanently, not just as a wartime measure. Completely, forever. 4 million people were unchained. A new America was being born. Not a perfect one, not yet, but one in which the promise of freedom would no longer be a lie spoken to some and denied to others. Lincoln spoke of healing, of malice toward none, and charity for all. He wanted not revenge, but reconciliation. He would never live to see it. On the night of April 14, 1865, just 5 days after the war ended, Abraham Lincoln sat in a theater box at Ford's Theater in Washington. A single bullet struck him behind the left ear. He never regained consciousness. The next morning, at 7:22 a.m., Abraham Lincoln was dead. A nation that had torn itself apart now wept together. His funeral train traveled 1,600 miles across the country. Millions lined the tracks. Farmers removed their hats. Formerly enslaved people knelt in the mud and prayed. Abraham Lincoln was not a perfect man. He wrestled with his own contradictions. He moved slowly when some demanded speed. He compromised when some demanded absolutes. But in the darkest chapter of American history, he chose unity over division. He chose justice over comfort. He chose to believe that a nation, flawed, broken, bleeding, was still worth saving. And maybe that is the most important question his legacy leaves behind. In a world still plagued by inequality, power struggles, and divisions rooted in race, belief, and fear, do we still have the will to hold things together, even when everything around us is pulling us apart? Nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power. Abraham Lincoln. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more untold stories that shape the world we live in today.